morning. This is the regularly scheduled Shelburne Select Board meeting of April 10th, 2018, and I call it to order. We thank you for coming and welcome. The first item on the agenda is to consider approval of the agenda. I have one change which I will seek board approval for, and that is to change number 14 to an executive session per 1 Vermont Statutes Annotated 313C to conduct contract negotiations with the potential interim town manager.
Move to approve. Move to amend the agenda to reflect a change 14A as submitted by the chair to add an executive session per 1 VSA 313A.
So, second.
Is there discussion?
No.
Any discussion? Any discussion from the public? Hearing none, we'll put the question. Those who approve signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay.
I abstain.
Josh abstains.
Do we get Mary on record saying aye?
Mary,
Yeah, I'm in favor.
Got it.
you opposed or
In favor.
In favor.
in favor?
That was the amendment, so now we need a motion.
Thank you.
to
So that's a
approve the
4-1 vote with Josh, a 4-0-1 vote with Josh abstaining. Is there any?
Right.
Mary? Mary Keogh, our members participating by phone tonight. Is there any other discussion of the agenda?
Yeah, I would like a clarification, if I may. At the meeting, the special meeting last week, we began discussing the rules of procedure. And it was my assumption that we would follow up on that with today's meeting, although it's not on the agenda. So I would like a clarification as to when that we would revisit that issue.
My expectation would be at a soon meeting, perhaps as early as the 24th, our next regularly scheduled
Okay.
meeting.
As I'll say later, I will not be here for the April 24th meeting, so I would prefer that if we were going to do it, it would be potentially the meeting after that.
First meeting in May.
Yeah.
Any other further discussion?
Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
And any discussion of that in the public, on the board? We'll put the question. Those who approve, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And Mary?
Mary? Mary?
Aye, sorry.
Aye. And those who disapprove, nay. The ayes have it unanimously. The next item is to consider approving Select Board meeting minutes of March 28, 2018, and April 3.
And I assume you realize it's a typo. It should be March 27th.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Joe just took a little bit of wind out of my
sorry.
sail. And on the matter of the March 27-minute meetings, I'd like to introduce commentary by noting on the first page under 3, there's noted an abstention by me. I believe that probably was Colleen, since that was a meeting that 3 of us were at and 2 were not. In any case...
Which one is that?
Wait, where is this?
Under February 20, 2018,
February 20th.
it indicates 3 ayes and 2 abstentions. One of the abstentions is mine, which would not have been the case.
Right. Nor would it be Mary, since she wasn't
No.
on the board.
I'm not sure, Joe,
Maybe-
that was the...
Yeah, and I was not at
that was the
meeting.
forum, wasn't it?
Sorry, which,
February 20.
that was the select board forum, I believe.
Yeah, that would have been the 3 of us, Jamie, Josh, and I,
Right.
with
Yeah, that
Colleen
would've been-
abstaining
I would've
and
abstained.
Mary abstaining for not being a member.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
And on page 4, I believe the architect Selin's last name is spelled S-E-L-I-N. That would be page 4 under number 10 at the very bottom. And on page 7, under discussion, under 16, the gentleman in the audience, quote unquote, would be Mike. Donning,
Does it count?
who for posterity's reasons should be recorded by his given name. You may want to say with gentlemen in the audience, that's probably your option, but in any case, those are corrections that I propose. Is there any other discussion of the March 27, 2018 minutes? Hearing none, would someone like to move approval of those?
Move to approve the March 27, 2018 Shelburne Select Board meeting minutes as amended.
Second.
And any further discussion? Hearing none, would those of you who approve signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And Mary?
Aye.
Aye. And those disapproving saying nay. It's unanimous. The second set of minutes are April 3rd, which was our meeting last week.
I didn't
We don't
see
have
we
it
have
on the
those.
agenda.
Oh, okay.
We don't have them.
We'll have to do it in next meeting.
And in which case, the next item for business is public comments. We're open and invite same. Dr. Metz.
Well, I don't, as you know, I don't like to raise any kind of controversy. However, I appreciate, particularly in light of the previous meeting, when you decided your priorities. It's a formidable list of priorities. And I believe you'll need all the talent that you have for all these questions sitting at the table with you all. And for that reason, and though it specifically pertains to one issue, I would like to suggest or request or propose that the recusal of Dr. Josh Dean on matters involving the railroad be rescinded. I don't see any further reason for that recusal to continue. It's depriving you of intelligent comment, a viewpoint that would broaden perhaps the perspective of the board, and I'd be very happy to see that Dr. Dean could once again participate as a full member of this board when serious things like this are being considered.
Thank you, Doctor. Linda?
Linda Reel, Falls Road. I'd like to comment on the previous meeting, which I was not at, but I heard the audio and I read the notes from Dr. Metz. I'd like to comment on the nomination that occurred, the nomination of the interim town manager. I feel the process could have been handled a little bit differently. Hopefully at this point it's all going to work out. And moving forward, I'm hopeful that the process to hire a new town manager will be a thoughtful approach, focusing on finding the best person for the job.
Thank you, Linda. Yes. I'm sorry, would you let us know?
Sure. Christine Krausart. I'm a Shelburne resident. I actually grew up in Shelburne, and about 4 years ago, my family, we moved back because it's an awesome place to raise kids. We bought a small parcel, half-acre lot down on the lake, and we've had a great time. But about 9 months ago, things really changed when the adjacent neighbor, the ownership of the home changed, and for lack of a better word, it turned into a party house. It's two owners, neither of them live in the town. One lives in California, one lives in Ferrisburg, and they are doing short-term rentals, so Airbnb. both stayed at Airbnbs. They can be awesome and a whole lot of fun, but without an ordinance addressing them, they can be a real disaster, and we have a really firsthand experience of that. Large groups, 17, 20 people. On a given Saturday can be 20 in the morning, a cleaning crew, and another group in. We live our house is 30 feet from the lot line, as is theirs, and I mean, it's everything you can imagine. Dogs we don't know on our property, people parking in places that aren't theirs, using property that is ours, waking up. We don't have air conditioning, you know, it's Vermont. Windows open, loud, really loud, lots of people. You know, we have guests that come. We live in a beautiful place. In the summer, we have friends that come for the 4th of July. We have a rip-roaring pumpkin carving party. But this is those are one-time things. This is every day, all year, over and over and over again. And the sort of sad thing is these aren't neighbors. Like, we moved here, we have an 8-year-old, so she can play in the yard, and we have a 4-year-old that's learning to ride a bike in our neighborhood. But it's not a neighborhood when you don't have neighbors anymore. And these people aren't community members, they're not friends of neighbors, they're not family members of neighbors, they're transient strangers, and there's no opportunity, like a longer term rental, for them to become more than that. So we just are in the position of never knowing what to expect next door, who to expect, and I guess I would just say, I think now more than ever, neighbors are important. We don't all agree anymore with religion and politics, but your neighbors are the ones that show up. You know, when my dad got cancer, that's who showed up with chicken soup, and it's who shovels you out and jumps your car. And I think that stuff is just pretty important. And I know that communities across the U.S. are dealing with this. We're probably seeing it a little bit later than other places. But I would just urge, I'm coming to you guys maybe instead of the Planning Commission, because these communities are dealing with it with an ordinance, and I think there's a pretty good opportunity for the people who are renting to have clarity, but also for our residents to have a place that we can still live. So I would just urge you to think about that opportunity for Shelburne. Thanks a lot.
Wait a moment. Can I clarify sort of, is your suggestion or your recommendation or your request something to regulate the use of the building as a Airbnb, or is it more just for the noise that is produced?
I think that's probably something you guys would be more knowledgeable about than I am, but I think more the former, the idea that right now our zoning ordinance doesn't directly address it, so rooming houses, bed and breakfast, hotels are all very directly addressed, and this is not directly addressed. So more than the noise, because there's adequate noise ordinances and other things in place, more this specific situation of the short-term, less than 30-day rental.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd just like to offer to the board, I think we've heard probably from all of your neighbors at this point.
Oh, okay.
And I'm guessing this is the same parcel, and certainly zoning enforcement does not fall under the jurisdiction of the select board, but as staff, we became aware of it last week, at least first I've heard of it, and we did send them, I guess I would say, a prequel to a notice of violation, basically saying, well, we think that there's a problem here, why don't we get together and talk about it? Those conversations have started, so we are aware of it, and like I said, I'm pretty sure we've heard from everyone in your neighborhood at this point.
There was sort of a strange, probably why it's come up this week. They're using it currently as a commercial, like a whole host of construction workers from a project downtown are living there, and they were using a dumpster for that offset. That's a little bit different than.
So like I said, we haven't actually issued an NOV. This is standard practice. We've kind of sent them a prequel
Yep.
saying that, we think there's a problem here, and I know that those meetings have started, and so we're aware of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, this topic surfaces periodically. I mean, you mentioned the planning commission. It did come before the planning commission at least twice when I served on the planning commission. So it's a topic that
Great. Other
just hasn't
communities that
picked
are
up
using it
momentum, I
with an
guess. I know
ordinance.
VLCT has some knowledge on this and resources, and beyond that, Dean, maybe you could say a couple words on.
If I may, I would say as follows. I agree with Christine, and in terms of disclosure, in the small world part of this, Christine's mother was a former member of the Planning Commission when I was staffing the Planning Commission, and she is currently a neighbor. The zoning situation is as Christine described. Zoning enforcement of short-term rentals is challenging in part because of a Vermont Supreme Court decision that does not make it easy for towns to enforce. So my recommendation would be that if it is pursued by the board, that a standalone ordinance would be the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Office. There are resources like VLCT and other places, and I'm sure that we could consult those if the board would like to have any kind of proposal developed, with or without the involvement of the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Dean. That's very helpful.
I also think there has been legislation proposed, right? There have been bills that.
Yeah, I haven't tracked what has been going on in the state level other than to have taken note of some agreements involving the tax department and Airbnb. This particular instance that Christine and the others of Ordway Shore that are referring to is not strictly speaking an Airbnb rental. It is advertised through other online venues.
Have there been a number of instances of complaints about such rentals?
Around town,
Yeah.
from time to time, it comes up.
There is one property in Davis Park that has been the subject of a couple of different complaints, and those have been addressed informally, short of a notice of violation, through contact with the property owner who has made incremental changes. There have been other complaints that seem to get resolved fairly quickly. There was one zoning enforcement that involved an Airbnb site where the property owner lived in the site and essentially had created an apartment to use, and we were successful as a town to get them to get an apartment approval.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you for coming. We appreciate the input, and you should be reassured that there is follow-on, and we'll certainly keep you posted. Thank you. Are there any other? Sean, Linda, can you let Sean go with?
Sean Moran, Shelburne. I will speak to that also. I manage a property that I had brought up to Joe with this very thing. We have a B&B situation also, where the owner lives next door and was renting another entire unit. The way we were be able to block it temporarily is the owner of the park was able to enforce it with his own rules. But they are going to be challenged, and we are going to face exactly what you're facing with, I have partiers in there for a weekend who come in, trash it, make the noise, bring in the cars, and then leave. So I'm left with a disaster with 10 to 12 neighbors who are up in arms, and I have no protection. So I'm saying this is coming up. This is going to be coming up a lot more because it's going to be a lot more popular. It's a fast way to make money. It's a fast turnaround. If you're willing to have your house, I don't know what kind of deposit they put down. I've never stayed in an Airbnb because no. I don't want to sleep in somebody else's bed. But this is really going to bite us if we don't step on it quickly.
Thanks, Sean. Sue?
Susan from Falls Road. I wanted to speak for just a minute about pedestrian safety. It's something that's all near and dear to us. I live on Falls Road, very close to the new crosswalk on Bacon Drive, which, in my estimation, was good money thrown away. It doesn't work. No one stops. The only time you can use it is when there's no traffic coming one way or This winter, I wrote to Joe once about the fact that you had to climb over the snowbank to even cross there. And it's been brought to my attention that on the lower part of Falls Road by the cemetery, that the flashing speed limit signs, that you can put cameras in those, take pictures when people are speeding, send them a warning, and if they don't heed the warning, if their picture's taken again, send them a speed ticket. You can put one down by where the crosswalk is on Bacon Drive. I think we've been spending a lot of time, a lot of money. It's a big issue, and I think something drastic needs to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your input. Linda, you wanted to?
Linda Reel, Falls Road. I'll ditto what Susan just said, because I use that crosswalk on Bacon Drive, and multiple cars just by, and you do have to climb the snowbank in the winter. And it's kind of hard when you have a dog with you. My question is, I would like to know where we are with the railroad appeal and how much money has been spent.
I think I can answer briefly. The appeal is underway. I don't really know that there's much else to say. I'm not sure how much money has been spent on the entire litigation or just the appeal. I think
We spent our $1,750.
17.5.
17.5, well, plus the
Probably.
2,500.
Sorry, plus the 2,500.
Yeah.
So I was just looking at
So the
the invoice
20,000
from
has
our
been
town. So
expended.
20 total. Thank you.
There's still work being put against it, but we've capped out. You'll recall it was a cap fee. There's still more work to do.
Any other public comments? Thank you. And select board comments. Mary, you want to chime in?
Can you hear me okay? I put
Yes.
headphones on.
Oh, yeah, we got it.
Very good.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll save my comments to when the matter comes up having to do with the interim manager, town manager. Thank you.
Josh?
Just what I mentioned before, that I regret that I won't be here for the April 24th meeting.
Well, we're sorry too, yeah. Colleen?
I just wanted to make mention, and Mike, I'm not sure if you were aware of this event. I wasn't aware of this event until Sunday morning, but it was a fundraiser for the Children's Miracle Network. It was held at our own town hall. It was organized by a 15-year-old girl. And I was Facebook messaged about it, and I brought my 5-year-old daughter, and it was just a phenomenal event. She organized this as, like I said, as a charity event for the Children's Miracle Network. It was a character meet and greet. She got all of her friends. Professional costumes were donated, and I wish I could remember exactly who it was that donated them. Food was donated. The town of Shelburne donated the town hall, the time there. And when we showed up, and I thought, well, okay, well, we'll just go. It was from 2 until 4. We came in, and there was a line out the door. When we came in, it was completely and totally organized. They put on a show where there was singing, and these kids were, I mean, this was like Disney quality singing. It was phenomenal. It was great, and the entire town hall was just packed. And it was, these kids were interacting with the children that came to attend the event, and I was just so impressed. And I couldn't figure out where the heck this came from, because I'd never heard about it before. And the 15-year-old, her name's Emily. Oh well, shoot. I think it's Richardson or something along that line, and she's running for Miss Teen Vermont, and she's doing this as a charity event, and I really hope that it becomes like an annual event, because it was such like just a community building. Everybody was together having this fantastic time. And there was 2 other mothers or parents there that I'd never met before, that both of them commented about what an amazing event this was. I was just really impressed, and it was all for a good cause. And there was a lot of things that can be accomplished using the resources that we have available to us. And having it be right there at that town hall was just a beautiful, beautiful space. So I just wanted to make mention of it and put a shout out, because they really worked hard, these kids. And I know a lot of other kids, I mean, probably mine are probably home playing Fortnite, and, you know, these kids are doing something amazing.
Jamie?
I just wanted to give a quick thank you to the first responders, police and fire in particular, for their role in the last community school lockdown active shooter readiness drill. Very good communication, collaboration with the leadership over there, so thank you to everybody who continues to be involved with the school, and more communication the better. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks. Joe will probably follow this, but we, at our meeting last week at this time, held a retreat and did so at Vermont Teddy Bear, whose president and staff were extremely generous with their time and conveniences. We were there for a good period of time. Among other things, their security system relies on certain individuals being in the building while non-employees are. So we had company without knowing it all that time. That's a kind of a sacrifice on their parts. In addition, I can report to you, I was totally ignorant of the fact that Vermont Teddy Bear is all about pajamas now and not teddy bears. So I urge any of you to take full advantage of that tour, which is extremely interesting. They are a major employer and business in this town with great commitments and dedication to us, and I want to be sure they know how grateful we are.
Don't forget the brownies.
That's right.
Brownies too.
And
Vermont
supply
Brownie Company.
brownies too. Yeah.
Vermont Brownie Company.
Yeah, they were really very generous with their time and welcome, and that's nice, because we know, as some of you know, we're searching other venues at points in time to convenience residents, and that was really a pleasure, and we owe them a great deal of thanks. Any other comments? Otherwise, Joe, you want to?
All right, real quick, the last meeting hinted at that we were close to making 2 hires, and since the last meeting, we hired Alan Akey for the Highway Department. I think he's going to be a really good resource. He worked for the Highway Department in Colchester for many years before hanging out his own shingle to be a carpenter. So he's coming in with a lot of experience and a lot of good experience. I think he's really going to serve the town and the Highway Department well. And then he'll start at the end of this month or early May. And Ravi Venkataraman, did I pronounce that right, Dean, or did I butcher that really bad? Ravi, and I apologize, Ravi. A young guy, he's finishing graduate school at Virginia Tech. We're not making him start the job before he graduates, so he'll be graduating in early May, and he'll be moving up here and starting in Shelburne first week of June. And Ravi, both Ravi and Alan went through a pretty extensive screening process, and both are excellent hires. I think they're going to serve the community quite well.
I can see the hokey smile on Jason's face.
You know, it adds to some of the rivalry within the staff, so that's for sure.
Thank you. We now are going to open a public hearing to consider proposed amendments to the zoning bylaws. We do so by motion. Is there one?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any discussion in the public? Hearing none. Those of you who approve signify please by saying aye.
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 Aye. And those opposed?
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. Thank you, Mary.
Yes.
Shall we defer immediately to Dean, please? Thank you.
I was doing a last minute look-see to see whether or not the chair has shown up. I believe he's traveling. If it's okay, I will show some slides. and be happy to answer questions. This is okay, so I do see that you have a set of slides in your packets. I'm going to be showing a very slightly expanded version of those slides. I would just explain for the audience that the town has a set of zoning regulations. We've had zoning regulations since the early 60s. The process of changing the regulations involves the Planning Commission developing a proposal, holding a hearing, sending that hearing to the Select Board. The Select Board has received it and has scheduled this hearing tonight. The proposal had its origins in the Planning Commission being approached by two separate parties who had different needs. One of the parties was seeking a change to the zoning regulations because they had made an application, it had been denied, they had appealed to the Development Review Board, they had been denied at the Development Review Board, and they had appealed to the Vermont Environmental Court, where the appeal has essentially been put on hold so that the town can consider making an amendment that would allow a permit or an approval to be granted for what it is they're seeking. And it's going to seem anticlimactic because what they're seeking is a fence, but we'll get to that in a moment. The other request that was made has to do with a proposal by the new owners of the Quiniasca Golf Course. The Quiniasca Clubhouse predates zoning, goes back to apparently the 40s. It's located in the rural zoning district. The rural zoning district has a large setback. The building is located in that setback. Under the zoning regulations, they can't expand, so they came to the Planning Commission to request a change that would allow a future application, and if that was approved, they could expand. There were a couple of other changes that the Planning Commission worked on. I call more technical in nature. One is really clerical in nature because there were some typos in a table. So there's a legal notice. I won't dwell on this slide, but basically we have gone through the process of publishing in the newspaper and posting notices in 3 locations around town in order to make people aware of this. It's also been on the website. As I said, the proposal was in response to those 2 requests. Gets a little bit cumbersome, but what would happen if this change was approved was that language would be added to the regulations, and that added language would allow someone to get a fence in the Lakeshore Overlay District, which is a specific overlay zone in the town. In addition to having districts, we have overlay districts, and those modify the regs. So it would allow someone to put a fence in the lakeshore setback. The other change, like I said, would allow someone to expand a structure that's in a setback in the rural district, although it's not that they can expand it without any consideration. There are limits on how they can expand. And then, as I said, there were these other technical changes. One is the updating some numbers in the table, and another would add a reference, or basically cross-reference in the bylaw for conditional use review. Basically would tie the town's authority to do conditional use review to 2 places in the law. Right now it just does it in 1, and this proposal would do 2. The actual mechanics are pretty simple. It would add a line in this section of the zoning regulations where there's a list of permitted uses. Things that can happen in this lakeshore overlay right now include stairs down to the water. Lakeshore decks are allowed within that setback. Docks are allowed. This amendment, if it was approved, would add to the list something we're calling lakeshore safety fence, as long as it's 10 feet back from the top of the bank. And then it would have a definition of lakeshore safety fence. And I'm actually not sure if any of the folks who are the property owners in question are here or their representatives, but they were working with the Planning Commission over a series of meetings, and there was concurrence on this definition. This is just a little cartoon. The blue is water. The red is a box that shows the setback, and the black boxes are houses that get their driveways someplace away from the lake. And like I said, right now, people can do stairs, they can do decks, they can do docks, but they can't do fences, and this would allow that. So the mechanics of the other change that's significant, right now, the zoning regulations say that in some districts, if you have a building that's too close to the road, you can expand that building. In other districts, you can't, unless the part that you add on meets all of the setbacks. And sometimes what that means is that people will put additions on, but they have to put them in the back when they would rather put them at the side because they're not allowed to put them to the side. This proposal would change the regulations so that in the rural district, it's a little bit more like some of the other districts, and it would say that if someone has a non-conforming structure and that structure's too close to the road, then someone could expand it as long as that expansion isn't more than 25% of the size of the existing building. So it says you can expand, it says you can do it in the setback, but it says you can only do it a little bit. So right now, the zoning regulations in the Route 7, along Route 7, you can expand a building even if it's too close. So if the setback line, if everything is supposed to be behind this line, but the building is actually in front of it, in the currently in the mixed use district, you could add to the north and the south or either side as long as you're getting no closer than the existing building. You can't do that in the rural district. So the proposal, if it was approved, would allow an addition to be sought. Would have to go to the DRB. It couldn't be any closer than the existing building. It could be a little further back if they wanted it, and it can't be more than 25% of the size. Everybody with me on that?
But it still can't go into the restricted area. Yeah.
They can't. So this would normally, if we were building from scratch, be an area where there are no buildings. The buildings would be behind this line. This would be the front yard. So the restricted area, if you're thinking of the front yard setback, they can't go any closer. They can't encroach any closer to the road, but they can continue the degree of encroachment that's already there. And they're limited to 25% of the existing building footprint. Maybe I can just stop if there are questions. If not.
So, such in the case when my wife and I replaced our house over in the rural district 2 years ago.
Yes.
And we were looking at a place that was 400 square foot larger than our current square footage. We were told we couldn't do that without putting it behind 400 square foot behind the setback.
That's right.
And my argument was 400 square feet isn't even a walk-in closet in some of the homes that are built today. And it didn't matter. It would have to be put behind the setback. This would allow that.
Yes, I'm remembering, Chris, that when you came in, I had to give you the unfortunate news that that setback pushed everything on your lot back. And so, if the law changes, if the regs.
Pushed us into replacing the septic system, which added another $30,000 to the project.
Yeah.
It's those kind of impacts that it's preventing.
Yeah. So, if the regs get changed, then the application would be filed, and then the board would make the decision. The board being the Development Review Board. The changing to the regulations doesn't remove the fact that there has to be an application. So I mentioned the next change. It's kind of technical. I think I'll just leave it at this unless there are questions. Municipalities can have zoning regulations because of the states granting them authority to do that. And there's a chapter of the law called Chapter 117 where it says towns can do zoning. Towns, as part of their zoning, can have conditional use review. They can have site plan review. They can do plan unit developments and so on. There are two authorities to do conditional use review. One is as part of conditional use review, and the other is as part of site plan review. And this is really kind of a belt and suspenders amendment that's being proposed to make it clear that the authority for conditional use can come from either or both places. That's pretty much it. And then, like I said, the last set of changes, we had someone coming into the office who said, I've looked at the table, and they don't match the numbers in the regular part of the regulations. And we looked at it, and we said, you're right. And so the numbers are being updated. That's pretty much it. Questions?
Comments? Any further comments, Chris?
As far as what pertains to the rural district, I think it's, I would even prefer to see it go to 30%. 25% really isn't a lot if you're talking about a house that's, like in our case, 1,125 square feet. 30% we can see.
So,
I will just say there was a fair amount of discussion amongst the Planning Commission, and this is the number they ended up with. In terms of process, the board certainly can make that change. It's a substantive change, so the Planning Commission you'd have to warn another hearing, and the Planning Commission would have to have an opportunity to provide its comments on the change from 25 to 30. There is a party that is promoting this. The representatives are here. It would delay the timeline. I have no idea what impact it might have on their timeline, but they may have comments on the addition of 2 weeks or possibly more.
Before you do, Dave, Sue, do you want to?
Yes.
You want?
Exactly.
We need to get to the mic.
Sorry.
the mic.
Thanks.
That would be the same in rural for residential and for commercial?
Yeah. Yes.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sue. Dave, do you want to comment?
Dave Marshall from Civil Engineering Associates. Yes, we have been working with the Planning Commission and staff in regards to this proposed revision. We actually had hoped that it would be further along in support of perhaps actually allowing the deck on the back of the building to be constructed earlier in the golf season than later. Obviously, our primary concern is just the ability to put those particular type of improvements in place in a timely manner. We don't want to disregard Chris's comments in regards to the 30% number, but as Dean pointed out, there was a lot of discussion in regard with the Planning Commission on the number that's recommended to the Select Board. So that being the background, we just look for a timely solution if we can.
Can I just ask a quick question? So the 25%, that's 25% of the total volume of the building can be extended basically laterally, but no closer to the road than the current building.
Right. You can think of it as a square footage budget. And so the footprint of that existing building provides the base for the budget. So 1/4 of that. And it doesn't have to be, and when I made these cartoons, it was not with an eye towards replicating the requests. It was to show them a little bit more generically. But in the case of Quiniesca, in fact, the whole building is in front of the line, if I'm remembering correctly, and their addition is in the rear. But any place that is in front of this line and behind this line is where it can be used. It doesn't have to be there.
You could also,
here, could be back.
I mean, you could also add another story, conceptually.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, this is, yes.
What that does is allow changes in the rural district that couldn't happen before, let's say.
So my question is just, if you go forward one slide. So see how like the light brown extends all the way to the back of the building?
Yes. Yeah.
And then if you go forward one more slide, and then that only goes probably about 1/3 of the way back. So was that just artistic
Well, I just wanted people to
that?
know that if this was the mixed-use district, if this was along Shelburne Road, there is no size limit, and it's in a sense more generous than what is being contemplated from the rural district. And so I just, again, a cartoon, I could have just left it as one making the point simply that it could be big. Rather than putting the same size block or an even bigger block to one side, I just split it up into 2 pieces. There's nothing magical about that. If we wanted to imagine that this piece was really down here, it's the same thing.
But it's just, my question is just about the specificity of the rule, is if it's 25% can be extended along basically the road frontage, does that mean that that block can be extended all the way to the posterior of the building? Which would make sense to me.
Yes.
It's really what you're that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean,
As long as it's
25%, it just would mean that, to make
25%
Could
laterally.
be a
could
thin
be narrower.
rectangle. It could be.
Could you back up?
Chris, you want to
You
wait
need the
just a minute?
microphone,
Let's finish.
I think this might clarify.
Yeah, but you need the microphone.
Yes, you need
Chris,
the mic,
nobody
Chris.
else can hear you at home.
This shows double what the primary space is now. It's essentially doubled it. Your next slide shows a quarter or 25%. Not really significant to how it would be built, just how much it could be expanded in the rural district versus along Route 7. It's a visual pictorial.
Right, thank you. That's not what I was asking.
These percent increases are based on square footage, not volume,
Correct.
and they're one time?
Yes, you wouldn't be able to make an application and then come back. It would be based on the original size.
Thank you, Colleen. Any other questions, comments, public hearing? Hearing none, we'll close that.
Gene, could I just ask a couple of questions? Dean, on the fence piece, just
Yep.
to confirm, you can't clear cut, right, in order to install a fence and take liberties with
Correct.
a buffer for the fence?
Correct. The lakeshore overlay requirements, all the others remain in effect. There's no allowance that is created by this. So the cutting that takes place, if it's necessary to cut in order to create this fence, then that cutting would have to be done consistent with the vegetative cutting
Right.
plan requirements.
Okay.
So there's no relaxing of those requirements
Okay.
as a result of this.
Good, thank you. And the statutory change, that was more inferred, right? In the past, it was,
Yeah, it's
And
belt
this
and
is just-
suspenders, and given the environment, that any little thing that's lacking might be exploited.
So again, like as far as the volume of the building, and the reason that I'm being so specific is we were involved in something where there was an interpretation that was different than the way that the rule was originally written, or the intent of the rule. And so that's why I was wondering, is it 25% increased in just the volume, or is the intent of the rule is to not increase the size of the building along the road frontage?
It's
can't-
it's footprint based. So this is the last. Oops. So
Square
the
footage.
you just can't go closer to the road once you
Right.
have the structure. You
And they
could
don't
just go
want any more
out.
along the road frontage.
They don't want it going further into the road, but you
Mm-hmm.
can put more on the side as long as it doesn't exceed 25%.
25%
That's shaded.
laterally.
25% of the existing,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So the restriction is only in place when it's measured by the building footprint. So that's the thing that is the unit of measure, building footprint. If someone came in with an application and the building footprint was expanded by 24%, the answer is going to be yes. If their building footprint increased by 27%, the answer would have to be no, you've got to cut it down to 25%.
Okay.
And this wouldn't affect existing overlay districts, right? For example, on the Lake Shore, they have their own
Correct.
setbacks,
This
right?
is limited to the rural district.
Okay.
This particular change is applicable to the rural district only.
Which is pretty big. So everybody.
Yeah, I can pull up a map of the rural district if people would like to see it, but
I'm familiar with it, just so.
We take your word.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's a change that looks modest on its face, but,
Significant.
well,
Yes, it is, as Jamie said, applicable to a relatively large area of the town where buildings are already encroaching on the setback. I would say there are, although the rural district is large in area, the number of instances where we have buildings that are encroaching on the front yard setback is relatively small, and they tend to be more historical parcels where there might have been a schoolhouse and it's below the 5 acres, as an example. So yes, it affects the district, and the district covers a lot of the town, but within the district, it's a relatively small number of cases where a building, it has to encroach to have this section be of any use.
Any other board comments? Any other public comments? So then entertain a motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
Second?
All those who approve, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mary?
Aye.
Thank you, Mary. And opposed, nay?
So we need to
That's
approve
unanimous.
2 things. We need to approve the bylaw change as well as the plan change
separable?
report, or no?
The report is a requirement on the part of the planning commission.
Okay.
You must have available. You aren't obligated to take any action.
Okay.
On the report. You would be acting on the bylaw proposal. And for the benefits of everyone, when the bylaw, if a bylaw is adopted, then it goes into effect 21 days later, unless there is a petition filed.
Are we prepared to adopt?
So move to amend the zoning bylaws as presented.
Second?
Second. Any discussion on the board? Mary?
Yes, no discussion for me.
Thanks. Any public discussion? We'll put the question. Those who approve, please signify by saying aye.
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 And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Dean. That was a very,
Thanks, Dean.
very informative presentation.
Thank you, Dean.
That was really well done. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
The next item is is the town clerk drawing an announcement for Shelburne's Dog and Cat of the Year. The town clerk, Diana, is
Drum roll.
here and present.
Okay, the moment you've all been waiting for, I know. So, the reason I started the pet contest was to raise awareness about vaccinating cats and the importance of rabies. For every 1 dog that gets rabies, there are 5 cats that get rabies. And so my second day on the job, a resident called me up and said, I was on my back deck and my neighbor's cat came over up onto my deck and bit me. And it's not licensed and it hasn't had its rabies vaccination, and what are you gonna do to raise awareness? And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking we have to license our cats. I better go license mine first before I ask everybody else to do it. So I did that, and then I wanted a positive, fun way to raise awareness. And I started the contest last year, and she called me up and thanked me for doing a positive campaign. And so I decided to do it again because I got positive feedback from her. So Sassy Miller is our Shelburne Cat of the Year, and Bella Rittenberg has been our Shelburne Dog of the Year. And I want to thank our sponsors, Happy Tales, Pet Resort and Spa donated all the gourmet food. Prima Doga gave 2 gift certificates for 2 nights for a cat, and some gift certificates from Shelburne Veterinary Hospital, Pet Food Warehouse, and Aubuchon Hardware. And of course, Shelburne News for helping us promote it. Thank you very much. And Tractor Supply Company, they didn't donate anything, but they held a rabies clinic, or 2 of them. They did a couple of them. And so that was very, very helpful. And so, without further ado, should we do the dog first?
I think we can, Dr. Metz did.
Dr. Metz, would you do the honors, please?
I'd first like to say that I have been fighting for licensing of cats for years and years and years. I even went down to, on invitation, by the way, to the city council in Burlington to argue for licensing cats because of what you said. That cats, because they, for the most part, are in more contact with wild animals than dogs generally are, that they are 3 to 1 more apt to be in danger of contacting a rabid animal. But beyond that, just let me make a public comment that anyone that's bitten by a cat, regardless of rabies or not, should immediately see their doctor, because cats carry in their mouth a certain bacteria which, if not, if the wound is not treated, it will become infected, and then you're facing a surgical problem. So, just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
I'd just like to add, if I could add something that Diane and I found out separately that I think somewhere down in the future, since we have a lot to do, was really interesting in that Montpelier, city of Montpelier, in addition to get your animal license, it also has to be microchipped. And for a lot of reasons, that seems like a really good idea because, as Diana said, there are a lot of animals out there without identification. And it seems like a minimal expense and something that might want to consider.
Thank you.
Okay, so apparently Roger Price owns a dog named Boomer. And Boomer is 10 years and 4 months old. And he is properly, or she, I would say he probably, yeah, it's a he. And it is properly vaccinated against rabies, I'm happy to see. And that apparently is the winner of the Shelburne Dog of the Year.
Thank you.
Okay.
Roger Price.
Congratulations, Boomer.
Would you like to do our cat as well?
Sure. The Cat of the Year is owned by one Dr. Joshua F.
Rigged.
Is that illegal?
Rigged.
And the animal is named Moshe, a male kitty which doesn't specify neuter.
It definitely is.
Thank you.
And with only one eye, too.
Oh, okay, well, I'm more concerned about the neuter. We all should be. And therefore, Moshe is the Shelburne Cat of the Year.
I would defer if anyone on the board considers that a conflict of interest.
Good.
No objections.
Clerk is a separately elected body.
It's true. I'd like to make a comment when you were talking about this and talk about a personal experience about a cat biting. My name is Sarah Tompkins and I live over on Falls Road. And in 2002, my husband got bit on the hand by a cat, neighborhood cat. Within 24 hours, he saw his doctor. The next day, he was up in the hospital. His hand was swollen from his fingertips to his elbow. He ended up having to spend 2 days in the hospital because of that one cat bite. And so, that is a personal experience to tell people you really need to make sure your cats, he didn't have rabies, but he got some sort of blood poisoning. And they were talking about having to open his arm up to drain the infection out of it. So that's how serious one cat bite can be. And he was just petting the neighbor's cat, and the cat turned around and bit him. So I just wanted to add that to what people were saying, because I think that's important that people know it really does happen.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that.
Can I add one more thing quickly? Not all doctors agree that one should be treated immediately for cat bites. I gave grand rounds to the area pediatricians. And I think it was divided 50-50 in the audience of pediatricians who wanted to not give antibiotics unnecessarily, and they insisted that they wouldn't give antibiotics unless there was evidence of infection. And the other half said, we don't wait, we give antibiotics. I don't need to tell you which side I'm on.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very
Congratulations
much.
to Boomer and Moshe, and our best wishes for a happy, did it get crowns or any special treats?
They get lots.
So they get all the prizes, and then their pictures are hung in the office, in the clerk's office, and they're up on our website. So.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Thank you.
Could have been a third basket for town manager. All in one.
Right, there you go.
They don't get the food though.
Thank you. Our next item is, also concerns the town clerk, and in that case, we will, we need to make a motion to constitute ourselves a liquor control commission. Would someone please
So
do
moved.
so? Jamie moves
Second.
and Colleen seconds. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, those who favor the motion, please approve by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. You okay with it, Mary?
Yes.
And that's unanimous.
And then Jerry, you're supposed to ask for disclosures of any conflicts.
I
under
was just about to
quasi-judicial.
ask if there are any outstanding conflicts that any member believes. Mary, starting with you?
No, well, no conflict, because I don't even know where the Walgreens is.
It's the Rite Aid.
It's the Rite Aid.
Rite
They-
Aid,
It's a
yeah.
Oh, okay,
Walgreens
thank you. It
pharmacy.
said Walgreens in the papers.
Yeah,
Well,
it's a
it is
Walgreens
Walgreens.
pharmacy within the Rite Aid, yeah.
They,
Oh, I gotcha. Okay, thank you. Nothing, no problem then.
Thank you. Anyone else?
No.
None. Hearing none. Mary, you want to, Diana, you want to proceed?
okay.
It's the last one.
Yes, it is.
It's a second class license. I think it's a renewal for Walgreens. Second class, just as a reminder, that's where you can go into a store and purchase alcohol, but you can't consume it on premise. You're taking it out to consume it. So that's what a second class is. Not too many people are sitting around Walgreens drinking inside Walgreens, so I'm sure you understand that. We have, like all these, Diana and I, or actually Diana passed it to the chief of police like we do to ensure that there's no issues. There's no issue internally that staff has to recommend to the board anything other than to approve it.
So move to approve a second-class liquor license renewal for the Walgreens in Shelburne.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. Those who approve the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mary?
Aye.
Aye. And those disapproving, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you
So-
very much. We'll be sure to sign for you before
We'll
we
get it
leave.
In the right spot.
space.
Over here.
And I believe we should make a motion to resume general session, in which case would someone be willing to do so?
So move.
Second.
Colleen moves, Jamie seconds. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Those who approve, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those,
Aye.
and those disapproving, nay. Thank you. It's unanimous. Thank you, Mary.
Yep.
The next item is to consider approving a grant application for the fire department for LED warning lights for the garage bay door.
I'm going to take this one, Jerry. I can. So this is a grant that actually Lee Krohn and I have worked on over the last month or so. These passive grants come up every year. It's 50-50 match. And they are offered, the passive is our insurance provider. I think some people know that here. And they offer these grants so that we can purchase pieces of safety equipment that will help us prevent incidents. So that's the goal of this grant program. And the proposal this year are LED warning light systems that glow red when the garage bay door is not open all the way. So they would be placed on the doors to help, I think, with probably backing up. Is that right, Lee? and going forward, to give an extra safety element for the fire trucks and for also people that might be around the fire department. So
The issue is that there's very minimal clearance between the top of our new piece of equipment and the garage door. And it's not easy to change the garage door, nor the equipment. So this requires pretty careful,
and again, with the aerial, the
Yeah.
quint, it's even more.
pretty careful.
Yeah,
Tight
we have
clearance.
the clearance is not great.
Kudos to the volunteers in managing that situation all the time, especially in conditions of high energy and excitement in terms of an emergency. So it's not just like getting in your car in the driveway as usual and going down to the post office. I will make a comment here. I'm a board member of the organization that makes these grants. But in that capacity, I have no influence, control, or on the grant program. And if that's acceptable, I would ask the board to allow me to vote on this.
No objections.
That being the case, do you want to add something, Joe, about the?
Do we tend to utilize these grants
Every year?
every year?
Yeah.
Is there anything else we should put in?
there's,
Or
yeah,
no?
there's other, well, I think this, at the end of the day,
He
will.
sort of suggested maybe we should
If
try to
it
max it out.
doesn't, if we have more money left over, I might come back at the meeting 2 weeks from now, apologies,
Okay.
Josh, and see if we have
It's a
another piece of
mid-May
equipment
deadline,
to
Got
throw
it.
in there,
Okay.
so,
So does the match come out of the fire department budget? Where does the match come from?
yeah, general fund, which is part of the fire department budget.
Okay.
Do you need the specific number, 2,400, or?
No, I think if you just
Just
approve the
the grant
grant application
application.
for that,
Okay.
that's fine.
So move to approve the grant application for the fire department for LED warning lights for the garage bay door.
Second.
Any discussion? Any public comment? Hearing none. Those who approve, please signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you, Mary. And those who disapprove by saying nay. Ayes have it. The next item is to consider approving a loan to purchase a new mower for field maintenance work.
I'll probably turn this over a little bit to Peter. This is coming up. This is an unanticipated purchase. If you look at the budget anyways, this was something that's supposed to happen later on. However, certainly with summer, hopefully will actually come this year, spring, we do need this other mower to maintain our open spaces. And with the financing arrangement that Peter and Darwin were able to work out, where we have a 0% loan for the first year, plus we saved the $1,000, I think it makes a lot of sense to purchase this now rather than wait for the next fiscal year. I don't know if Peter has any other comments, but we are bumping this purchase up a little bit to try to take advantage of this.
Yeah, our buildings and grounds superintendent, Darwin Norris, determined that he's got 2 mowers now, field mowers that he uses. This one's about, one he wants to replace is about 6 years old, increasing maintenance cost on it. We did have a pre-season opportunity, Spear Street Mowers, to purchase this at a discount and actually an extended warranty as well, which wouldn't have been available in the next budget year after July 1st. So the manufacturer offers a 0% loan. So we'll purchase it now and then pay off the loan in the fiscal year when the purchase was expected to be completed.
Thank you, Peter.
So this is a budgeted item that we are not actually going to take out of this year's budget at all, but when it was actually budgeted for.
Right, that's
We
right.
budgeted for some capital improvements for next year's budget. The mower we were hoping would go another year, so we'll have to move things around in terms of what we were planning on, but yeah, it was budgeted for in the new budget that starts July 1st.
Any other comment from the public, from the board? Joe?
No, there's a proposed motion at the bottom of the memo that Peter and Darwin worked up for you.
And that motion, which I'll read, is to purchase a HD Super Z mower from Spear Street Mower Specialties at a cost of $11,332.57, financed at 0% through Sheffield Financial until September 2018, when it will be paid for from the fiscal year 2018-19 budget.
So
Is there-
moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, we're ready to vote. In which case, will those approving signify by saying aye?
Aye.
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 Thank you, Mary. And those disapproving, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Peter, very much for that initiative. Thanks, Joe. And the next item is to discuss priority items as identified at the Select Board Retreat. Josh, you want to take the lead on this?
Sure, let me,
Maybe I'll do a very quick
that'd be great.
introduction.
Okay.
At our retreat last week, we identified a group of items that we considered together and unanimously to be priority for numbers of reasons. In some cases, they're obligatory actions, in some cases desired, and some have early time frames, some do not. But we agreed on an initial grouping. There were many more ideas offered in discussion, and at the time, we decided to take up the remainder of those in an effort to identify perhaps a second grouping of priorities, and that's what Josh is going to initiate discussion about tonight.
Sure, and I'm not sure the best way of going through it, I assume everybody has looked at it, this was, you know, in some ways a taxonomy exercise, which I always appreciate. And I tried to look at different ways that these things could be organized and to determine what might be the most useful. One was by topic, and the topics ended up as being legal, employment and employee issues, resident input and communication, governance structure and process, select board planning, and town quality of life issues. I don't think it's probably worthwhile going through all of them themselves. And then the second way was to try to rank them as was suggested before, is sort of to figure out, you know, which ones are urgent and which ones, and some sense of, are these easy to do, are these more difficult, how much they cost, try to put those. And so I tried to essentially take what I knew, and certainly my perspective on these, as to stick them into tables in that regard for high, medium, and low urgency and difficulty. So I think certainly members of the board could weigh in on all of these. I'm not quite sure the best way of getting that kind of input, other than saying, are there, you know, is there a general agreement that I do a reasonable job? Or are there things, certainly I don't have any problem with moving some to the other. There's, you know, this was purely a, you know, out of my head metric to do this. But at least it certainly, I look at, in these kinds of exercises, the things that I see are things that might be a higher urgency to identify, and things that are really easy to do. And we work on those first, and then we move on to the next set. And it may be worthwhile to sort of say over the next year, okay, let's take a couple of these per select board meeting, and you know, maybe one from each category, two from each category, and then sort of address them, you know, in sequence. There's no sort of priority amongst the table. They were just how they ended up on the list. So if that seems to be reasonable, I think that may be the best way to try to work our way through the list, unless people really want to work on one more than another. Certainly, personally, I've advocated before that, you know, I think the AV and public input improvements are something that I'd like to work on sooner than later. But I'm open to whatever how the select board would like to proceed on these.
Does that, remind me, Josh, does that include the top 8?
No, these I
tier
separated.
two.
These are
Okay.
tier 2.
Tier 2.
Right.
We
These
identified
will,
tier 2
okay.
for the next grouping.
That's what I
Right.
thought. I just couldn't
Right.
remember. I looked at those somewhat
Do
quickly.
you have that printed off by any chance?
I did not print them off.
I like the, I mean, is it open for
Sure,
comment?
yeah.
Thank you for queuing this up too. That was good work product. I sort of like the idea of the urgency and then weighing the energy, resources, difficulty piece better than trying to categorize it as legal governance.
Yeah, it was just a way to start to
Yeah, just
organize
to
them
think
and say,
about it.
okay, where do these fit into different
Yeah,
categories?
between the two, I like that second model of trying to prioritize it, but that's just me. I don't know how others think.
Well, I think as far as like organizational, probably the first method, but as far as prioritizing, the second method.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the way I looked at it as well.
Yeah.
It's just, how do you conceptually put these into into different folders, so to speak? But operationally, it makes it easier to deal with them on a more specific basis based on criteria.
Mary?
Josh, I think you did a marvelous job with both of them. I guess I agree with Colleen. I like the one by topic, and just in terms of conceptualizing the work ahead of us for these second tier items. I find it very, very helpful. I find both of them quite helpful, and I appreciate you doing it.
Thank you.
I'll add my comments, Josh. Yeah, I think you did a super job. My sense is that it's a good deal to absorb at the moment, not least because we've had 3 meetings in as many weeks. And because you're not going to be here on the 24th, what I suggest is we all spend the time we should with it and prepare for a major presentation with you in the first May meeting.
And I can project it as
By
well.
way of some explanation, we've tried to stress amongst ourselves the fact that we have limitations on our own energy and availability. Sometimes you forget that some board members work, and there is just so much you can stack on people's plate. And as some of you know who've been regular attendees, we have a good deal on it already. Plus, we have a change in town management, as well as a major change coming in the summer. So this likely will be a continuing interest on our parts. At points, it will morph into some direct instruction, in effect, or expectations to a new manager. So we appreciate the way Josh structured it. And on that basis, my sense would be to not postpone, but just simply schedule the full presentation on all our parts for the first May meeting.
Right. And so I ask if we can post these on the website so people can see them. And secondly, that I really want to express my appreciation. I've got about probably 20 different sets of not sets, but suggestions from the Shelburne residents, in addition to the ones provided by the Select Board.
They were very good.
Yeah.
Good input
really
from the
appreciate
community.
that.
And so that was really worthwhile, and I hope it provides an opportunity for members of the community to add their voice to what they think the Select Board should be thinking about. And I don't think this is a one-shot deal. If there are more things that people think up, we can add those to the lists.
Can we cross the updated photo off yet, or?
I don't know.
Joe?
I don't know if it's on there or not.
No.
Just saying, it's an easy one.
Thank you. Are there any public comments on this item? Sue?
McClellan. Is there anything in the town charter that says that you can't have a subcommittee of some kind to help you with some of these other, gopher type little jobs?
Maybe.
I know a lot of you work, and just a thought, maybe volunteers that could help you out with some of these things. It is a tough job.
We also, and if anybody can think, maybe some of these things could be worked on by some of the committees as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good notion.
Yeah, it is a good
Susan,
point.
because you don't want to stand down in the face of needs. On the other hand, we're trying to recognize the priorities of just simply energy and attention. And at parallel, I think that's one of the reasons why we've been emphasizing the liaison to committees, because they are a major resource for ourselves and for the town. And there may be a great amount of capacity there to take on a number of things. And I suspect as the weeks go by, we'll be able to kind of take advantage of that, as we go. But we certainly thank the community input to this point, and would encourage you to anyone interested to continue to give us ideas. Otherwise, I'd like to go on to the next item, which is to consider allocating additional local match monies for village transportation study approved as part of the fiscal year 2018 Unified Planning Work Program.
All right, actually, when I put this on the agenda, I thought that the local match increase was going to be a little bit more than it ended up being. I probably had the ability to approve this, but I was looking to make the agenda a little fuller for you. So you approved this not this past February, so 2 Februarys ago, when the board at the time was applying to the Regional Planning Commission to do some planning projects. This was for a village transportation study, which is kind of germane since you've decided that's also a priority for this year. To do the study, we budgeted $37,500 for it. Originally, regional planning came back and told us it was a $55,000 project. We said, no way, that's too much. And now we've whittled it down to $45,000. So the question for the board is, the local match, it's a 20% match, so it just increases the local match from Shelburne from $7,500 to $9,000. So given the higher price tag, just want to make sure that this is a project that the board still wants to do. Dean and I talked about it, and we thought, well, is there a better use for this money? Could it be put for the glossier comprehensive plan cover and some other things that we've talked about? And at the end of the day, it's our recommendation that you do approve the additional money, and that, especially since it's a priority project for the board to focus on these things, it makes that much more sense. So that's our recommendation.
Yeah. I guess and I don't disagree with anything that you've said, and I sort of vaguely remember this coming up a couple of years ago, but before the traffic safety, ad hoc traffic safety put in. And I guess my only concern is for this is that during our budget process, we talked about allocating funds to the to solve the recommendations that the traffic safety group put together, and we certainly didn't meet their goals for funding that. So I guess I would be more inclined to take the $9,000 of match money and first put it towards meeting those recommended changes, rather than funding another study. The study can be done in the future as well. We can budget for that next year, because I assume that this would be coming out of this year's budget. So I would think that it might be a more valuable or a more immediate improvement in traffic safety to follow up with the recommendations that we already have, rather than working on something that may be 2 or 3 years down the line.
So I guess like my concern is we have been doing things along the way that the Village Safety Committee has proposed, and we're seeing some issues, you know, like that the crosswalk wasn't working as well as we'd like. And I think there's a balance between doing what people there that live there see and feel that would be helpful to them because they're the ones who have to, you know, basically live in the war zone. And at the same time, that has to be balanced with the fact that they're not professionals, right? I'm not a professional in village or in safety, and that's what we're kind of depending on a study to help us elucidate. Whether this is the right study or not, I'm not sure. But I don't want to go forward with projects that, with a little bit more information, we could do a little bit better.
Well, I think those are good points. First, I think there was professional input to the village safety group on these projects, but I think it's more of a timeliness issue, that this is something that has been discussed and it's been advocated for. I think this group has been very conscientious in the things they put forward, and it seems to me a question of our budgetary priorities, in that when we discussed this as the budget for next year, we didn't fully allocate the funds that were asked for. So my understanding is that this funding would come out of this year's budget, which wasn't allocated for. So it seems to be a sort of a conflict in how do we meet these needs. And I agree, there is always room to get a better understanding, but there's also a question of immediacy versus long-term planning. And so, as I said, my preference would be to if there's consideration of using such funds, then they would go to the projects that have already been identified, and then in our next budget next budget discussion, we then put it into that, or neither, if that would be the decision of the board.
Want to comment?
The budget that was passed does have some money for projects that the Village Safety Committee and the Bike Ped Committee have advocated for. There's money in there, assuming that it can be done within the budget. We think it can be done to enhance the crosswalk at the cemetery. So that was something that was asked for, that's included in the budget. We put more money in for enhanced fog lines, not just in the village, but around town, to do that better. Trying to think, there's a few other areas so there was some money that the voters approved and that you put forward for the FY 2019 budget. I can't disagree with anything that Josh has said, except for I would just add that, you know, you have budgeted the $7,500 in this year's budget to go towards this planning project, and so that's part of this year's budget. And this ask is just for an additional $1,500. I shouldn't say just. It's for an additional $1,500.
Yeah, my sense of it, I couldn't agree more. Josh, having been greatly involved with the village safety group from its start, couldn't agree more. But I don't. My interpretation is this is not a question of where to put another $1,500, so much as it is a request to add $1,500 to a match in a present year item. Further, as I recall the plan, the study itself, it will be a very significant boost to efforts to establish a safe village. And I think that's timely in terms of the library project, which is going to alter both pedestrian and vehicular traffic. It's timely in the sense that the various pilot projects that the safety group sponsored have demonstrated not only need, but some successes. And in some cases, his pilot projects were intended to demonstrate less than success. They were meant as learning experiences, exactly. They were very economic uses of monies to establish far greater intelligence about what it takes to make for a safer village. And finally, the study also is in context of the entire town. And you'll recall one of our goals for the next year was to extend these initiatives to other areas of the community where there are similar problems. So my sense would be that this is
I don't think that's right.
I don't think that's the case.
No?
No.
I think this is
This
just
is limited
just
to
for
the
the
village.
village.
Yeah, the scope's
Shelburne
limited.
Village.
This
I
study
understand
is-
that, it's not town-wide, but it established a village context for more than just one or two neighborhoods.
Yeah,
That's right.
And
traffic congestion on Route 7, yeah.
so it is
I
not
guess
just,
so, yeah.
just one.
It's not just Falls Road.
It's not just the Marset Falls Road with which we began. I understand that. Further, my understanding at the time was it's a fountain for other grant opportunities based on the fact that we've accomplished it.
Could be, yeah, absolutely. I think that, and I would also think differently if Lucy Gibson, she's the project engineer who's going to be on this for Du Bois and King. She did really excellent work for Shelburne last year with the Southern Gateway project, and so to have her be part of this project is worth it as well.
So I can geek out on planning studies as much as anyone, as Lee knows and others, but I'm struggling with this one because I kept coming back to, so what are they going to tell us that we don't know yet? Having looked at a lot of these other studies that are referenced and worked on these as well, part of me would like to prioritize the projects that have been identified. And that's where I keep coming back to on this. I think we can always come back to this down the road and pick it up, and
I agree.
I think things will change with what's happening at the town center, right? So I get concerned about the point in time aspect
Exactly.
of these studies just anchoring us on a condition that no longer exists after traffic patterns change, et cetera. So for me, I personally would like to see us just action against projects that have been identified and keep this on the back burner, keep looking at it, but not, I don't know if it's a priority at this point, but I could be convinced otherwise. I think both points are valid, but for me, I would prefer to just table this for now and try to action against what's been identified. I think we struggle a little bit to make progress. We're good at the studies, at getting those in the can, and we're not great at the follow-through and sort of living and breathing that. And that's not a slight against anybody. It just, my experience is they tend to get parked and we don't really live and breathe it. Yeah, I mean, it's just not front and center. I mean, the Southern Gateway, I know that was a very good work product, but I haven't heard much about it lately. I don't know what's going on with it. So it's, I mean, that's my only concern with another study that may just
Yeah, we had
sit, but I don't know.
Which kind of goes
I'm
back to
torn
my
on this one.
Which goes back to my comment as to whether this is the right one, but I don't want to give up on the idea of studying traffic flow throughout the entire town and maintaining that momentum that the village safety group started and extending it everywhere.
Mary, have you got a comment?
Well, I guess I tend to agree with Jamie on this one, and I've heard from a few constituents in response to the agenda item asking why we need another study, and I'm new to this, so I don't have any background to be able to say one way or the other whether this is a project that is worth pursuing or not, although my gut reaction is very similar to Jamie's. I read the materials, and honestly, I couldn't even really figure out what the little synopsis summary was all about, because the words used are so gigantic and broad. It became somewhat it was so out of context, I couldn't put it in context. So I'm just really sort of at a loss, really. I don't have enough data to make an informed decision at all.
Okay. Sean?
I have a question as to a little education. So this study, does this study come to you and says the town should relook at this stoplight and reconfigure it so that it doesn't work? So you know when you come along past the general store and it doesn't want you to turn and it puts the little do not turn and half those people turn anyhow? Does this study say, okay, you know, and if it's not enforced, do we take that out? Because nobody does it. You got people behind you beeping, take the right, and you go, no. See the little arrow? It's got to cross them. We're not taking the right. So screw off and wait till the cross goes. Or do they say the cemetery crosswalk is great, but we need those lights like they have, you know, at the one near Shelburne Museum? Is this what the study tells us to do, and then we don't do it, or we just, you know? Starting with what Jamie says, do we have a list of things that they say, do this, do this, do this, and do this, and we haven't done those? That's my question. So why are we getting another study that's going to give us another 10 to say do these other 5 things when we haven't done the first 5? And I don't think we're abandoning studies. I just think we're, you know, it's like a teacher with homework. Okay, you got to do these 5 before I'm going to give you these 5 because you haven't done these 5 yet. So why would I put something more on the town and stretching that budget when, you know, we're really tight on that budget? And I know the money is not a huge amount, but little adds up to, oops, we went over, you know, $50,000 on all these little things.
Thank you, Sean. Chris?
I'm not that short. One thing I would like to ask that's imparted in this whole process is a little common sense. To get back to the root of the problem, pedestrian safety, what is the cause, or what is the absolute problem that seems to be happening here, and it all seems to come back to excessive speed in the village area. I'm not myself convinced that bump outs and extra crosswalks, and I'm probably venturing into an area where some people are not going to like me, but things of that nature are not an impediment. They don't slow traffic down. As you narrow it up, people just keep going and they adjust. And what you're doing is you're getting vehicles in opposite directions closer to each other and bringing on a more inherent risk of a head-on collision or a glancing collision, which could end up with a pedestrian struck once somebody loses control of the car. If we're going to address the root of the problem, speed, I know Joe has said before, we don't have enough officers to be able to patrol, but I believe Susan McEleney nailed it on the head. Why aren't we finding technology that we can utilize to give the officers an extra hand to document the people who are speeding, and if needed be, give them tickets, because that's really what you hit somebody in the pocket, it's going to slow them down. There used to be a time, this town used to be known, you don't speed through it because you were going to get a ticket if you did. And it's gotten away from that, and maybe that's where it needs to get back to.
Thanks, Chris. My suggestion is that we pen this to a meeting in May for several reasons. Yeah. One, because we do anticipate that the Bike Pedestrian Committee and the Village Safety Group will make a presentation at some point in a May meeting, which will update all of us on the initiatives to this point, which will address a lot of the questions that have been raised, as well as answer a lot of concerns. In doing so, I'd urge Joe that we take another look at the study costs and see if they can't be adjusted to the existing match. And thirdly, respecting the fact that one member is not going to be here at the next meeting, I'm not sure whether that should take the form of a motion. If so, any of you can so move, more as just a direction to the town manager.
So you guys surprised me tonight, which is fine. I don't have strong feelings. If Dean was here, I'm surprised he's not. He'd probably be staring daggers at you right now. But if this project did come within budget, let's just pretend that the world was that this came at a 37.5, I wouldn't even be here right now.
Correct.
It would be gone, right? Yeah. So, you know, I mean, I'm all for doing projects. I get it. I don't think I shouldn't say this definitively. I don't know if you'll be able to wait till May to make this decision. I mean, this money is budgeted this fiscal year to get rolling now.
But there's no deadline, too.
Well, I don't know that for sure. I thought
well,
you
that's something we need.
but I would think the 24th, you probably will have to make a decision. I apologize that Josh won't be here, but I can't imagine we'll be going to kick this decision back past that.
If we need to for reasons of deadline,
That's,
you've got
yeah, sure.
time in between. If that's agreeable,
Fine.
all of us? Okay. In which case, any other comment? In which case, we now will entertain motions to enter executive session for...
Okay. I was just wondering if we want to switch 15 and 14.
Well, we could. 14A was what we established in the approval of the agenda as the next item.
It's not a bad idea. I mean,
We have, I
Matthew's
know,
here.
at least several people present. What's your pleasure?
I'm open to
It's fine.
putting
Skip to
15
15.
in front of 14.
I think we're allowed to, we can do that within the agenda, or change the order as needed.
Especially
Okay.
since we're
Agree.
past the
Everybody's-
time that was
Yeah,
on the agenda anyway.
agree.
Yeah,
Anybody who's
Mary,
here will be
okay
here.
with you? We do have one problem here. The town attorney's waiting on the phone.
I'm just going to let him. I'll just let him know.
Okay.
So we need to clue
Well,
that
I think he's
person in.
waiting near the phone,
Yeah.
so you're fine.
All right, in which case we'll move on to item 15, consider appointing a town manager search committee. There are two elements here, one of which is in front of you as a draft number 2, which is a mission statement prepared for your review and discussion and possible approval, and the other of which is the nominations of membership of the town search committee. It may be helpful if I just simply read the statement as it's been presented, so everybody it's fairly brief. There are copies here for anyone who would like them. It states that the Town Manager Search Committee is an advisory committee to the Select Board responsible for soliciting and reviewing all applications received by the town for the town manager position, conducting initial screening of the applicants, and recommending to the Select Board finalist candidates for the Select Board's further consideration. The membership, the Town Manager Search Committee shall be made up of 13 members and 2 ex officio members. Each Select Board member will nominate 2 members. The Select Board will nominate 3 members and appoint 2 additional members ex officio. The Select Board will make every effort to ensure the membership of the committee is representative of the community as a whole. Budget. The Select Board shall provide the Town Manager Search Committee with $1,000 from the Select Board's discretionary line item to be utilized for initial committee expenses. Should the committee decide to contract for search support services in full or in part, or for search activities, the Select Board would strongly consider such a request. The Town Manager Search Committee is a town committee, board, commission, and as such must adhere to all applicable laws, policies, and ordinances, and specifically the open meeting law. The Town Manager Search Committee will organize itself at its first meeting. The expectation of the Select Board is that the Town Manager Search will conclude by September 1. The Select Board entrusts the committee to conduct the search at a pace and in the time needed to recommend the best available candidates. The committee may, in completing its work, exceed that date. Now, this is a draft proposal for the board to discuss, as well as anyone who cares to make a comment in public. The idea is that as we nominate even tonight, members to the committee, there should be a full understanding in the public as well as nominees, what we're intending by the establishment of it. Would Mary want to comment?
Sure, thank you. My only concern about this is that has to do with the number of members. 18 people seems like an awful lot of people.
No, we're 15
Oh,
now.
it's 15, sorry.
Two
But
are
still,
not
15
voting.
seems to be a lot, and I would be curious to know how many members were on the last committee, and if that was deemed to be cumbersome or well organized.
If my colleagues permit, I can respond. Of the 15 members, 2 are ex officio, and their participation is going to be determined by the committee itself. In other words, as to whether they are a voting member or not. In the case of the 13, my experience was with people who are busy in their ordinary daily lives, certainly over the period of months-long search, it's not frequent that everybody will make every meeting. And very important that there be a sizable group at each meeting, especially in later stages of interview and vetting. Kathy and I and others, I don't immediately see anyone else who was on that town manager search committee 4 years ago, but at the initiation, I thought a large number was not manageable. I underestimated Kathy's ability to chair a committee, and certainly underestimated the fact that on a given night, 13 people are just simply not going to be able to come. They're away on trips, vacations, and so I think the idea, Mary, was to set up a number that would allow a constant 7 to 9 members present for any activity.
Well, as long as it worked last time, I feel okay with it, and it was just my concern that you wouldn't get enough members, that you would have so many different members at each different meeting that there wouldn't be continuity just by virtue of the size of the committee. And I would want to stress that people who agree to serve on this committee should, of course, make every effort to attend every meeting. It might be a large time commitment, but it's for a limited period of time. But that was my only comment. Otherwise, I'm fine with the mission statement as laid out on this draft too, as you read. Thank you.
Colleen?
No, we discussed this at the last meeting of exactly what you just said, so I'm aware of it and understand. The 2 ex officio, that was the only change. Because we talked about one, I guess, well, we talked about Diana Vachon as the town employee representative as part of the core group. But you were talking about an ex officio as being like Ann Janda, somebody who does, the copying and organizing and getting the rooms.
Yeah, the thought behind those two, that idea is that we might benefit by representation from such as state representatives, from county officials, from others who hold elected office, who have a pretty unique perspective on Shelburne and its importance to the region, where they may not be, however, individuals that should be members in the fullest sense. Secondly, there will need to be administrative support for this activity. It comes at a time when we will have an interim manager whose plate is going to be full enough. It cannot be a burden that's laid on any member of the committee that just is not going to be workable or in some sense fair. So my sense was to propose a second ex officio position that is represented by an administrator from the town office. In which case we would have the benefit of someone who's very professional in support and backup, and who could tend to some of the just what seemed like minor but turned out to be major tasks of copying and room arrangements and provision of additional information. And that's behind the thought. The three members that we've identified as amongst ourselves, we've referred to them as core, were intended to involve persons who may not have been, who would not have been nominated by any of us in the group of 10, but who were felt in common to have very important roles and benefits for the committee. An example of that might be someone who is serving on the school board, so that we strengthen that connection and have the benefit of that perspective. Josh?
Yeah, I go back to the ex officio comment. I don't think that was discussed last week. And whereas I do see some benefit, I have two concerns. One, if we actually are going to have, which I think is a good idea, some representation by town staff, then I think town staff should be given the opportunity to select that. I don't think the select board necessarily has to do that if that's the purpose of that ex officio member. Or if it's someone else, then we have to sort of understand what we really want that to happen. And second, it may be up to the committee to decide what they think those ex officio members might happen. If they do need administrative staff, that's one thing, but they can decide that. And just as a thought in that regard, the idea of if it is going to be town staff, then I think it was brought up last week, then the concern about them participating in an activity which will be selecting their supervisor. So in the case of Anne, for example, that would be her direct supervisor. And
that's why they wouldn't vote, though.
Yeah, well, but I still think that's I think that's not a slippery slope. I just don't think that's a good relationship that you want to start with. I think if there are other individuals in the town, or do we hire someone specifically for that purpose to not burden people with that? We have any number of part-time employees that might appreciate additional effort. So given what we understand, which have been said, a lot of our employees are already have full plates. So I'm not sure it's something we want necessarily to burden more administrative duties if that's the case. So I don't think these things have really been that well defined. And so I just have some concerns about that.
No, I mean, my view is that it's, and I said this at the retreat, I really want to invest the committee with as much authority as possible and get out of the way.
I agree.
In my opinion.
I agree.
So I would almost, beef up that mission and make sure that it's clear that they'll actually be developing and implementing the process. It's not for our
I agree.
Input and advisory. It's they actually are implementing it, executing on it. And if they need additional funds for the executive search firm, of course, we'd weigh in on that and approve a contract. But beyond that, I mean, I think the ex officio idea is a good one. I think Jessica Brumstead would be a great addition to it for a lot of reasons, primarily because she's so close to the action and what's happening with the town. And I also think a staff member, I mean, Ann comes to mind, but I don't disagree with you that it'd be good to have everybody weigh in from the staff to make sure that it's a collective recommendation and that everybody supports it.
Right, and that, again, going back to what you said, I mean, that even that selection could be turfed to the committee, as I say, is like.
Yes, I agree.
Is there any comment from the public? Kathy?
This is my height. Hi, Kathy Brooks. Last time we did have two town employees. We had Josh Flory from the police department, and we also had a gentleman
Walt.
from the water,
Here, wastewater, Walt.
Walt. And they actually provided a lot of valuable input because they live it on a day-to-day basis. So, there didn't appear to be a conflict. They handled it very professionally and actually gave us some insights that were helpful as we were going through the process, because both of them, you know, one from the police department, one from another operating department, came from it from different perspectives, but being insiders really provided a viewpoint that helped sort of guided us. Sometimes we were like thinking pie in the sky, and they were like, this is what it's really like. So,
Thanks.
I agree.
Thanks, Kathy. Doctor?
This is for future reference, perhaps, but I happen to have a close friend and neighbor who, for the last many years, has been a professional, what do they call them, headhunter, searcher, and I spoke to this person right after your retreat meeting, and he agreed to provide a one meeting seminar or one meeting interaction with the committee to help define the methodology of searching for a qualified person, and how to find these people, and how to bring the process into an orderly way. So I'm happy to be able to offer to the committee, when it's formed, this alternative. And of course, this is free. He wouldn't charge me.
It's appreciated.
That's
Thank you,
great.
Doctor.
Keep in mind you have people on that committee that have been in very senior roles who
Yeah.
are very familiar with that. So I would just defer to
He would
the
not
committee
be a
again
member of
on
the
whether
committee.
there's value in that. I would just
He would not. This man would not be a
Yeah.
member of the committee.
Yep.
But he would be willing to share his expertise to work.
Fair
for one
enough.
of
Thank
the
you.
top committees in the.
Thanks, Doctor. Any other comments? I have one. I respect the several points that Josh has made. It might be useful for us to consider the fact that we still have 3 core members to appoint, which could include direct representation from town staff. The issue, as I'm sure all of you are understanding, is that there could be difficulties with a direct report making a recommendation about a future boss. There are ways of seeing that in every direction, and pro or con. I feel, as Jamie does, that ought to be a decision of the committee itself. And should the committee not permit ex officio members to vote, the problem is somewhat solved. I do think that it's very important for us, having served with Kathy the first time, to provide every amount of potential help that we can to the committee. It's a daunting task. And the reason is not so much to ease their burden as to make sure we have conducted the most extensive search we can. That takes more time, that takes more advertising, that takes more effort. For instance, an initial committee meeting, we may look to them for information about what they think are the skills and attributes that the Shelburne Town Manager should have. So my sense is that when you expand and extend and encourage the fullest search that we could manage with our resources, you are going to create some administrative burdens and demands that may be unnecessarily placed on members. And in that sense, I think it's extremely important to have the benefit of an administrator. The other comment to make at this point is that tentatively, I've taken the initiative to just establish a meeting room and a date, no more than that, for an initial committee meeting on the 26th of April, which follows our April 24th board meeting, at which point we thought we would be complete and formal and final. And that's only to move the process along to the extent of getting the committee having opportunity to organize themselves. And in anticipation of that, with Ann's help, we've begun to corral input from various communities and professionals who can make presentations or provide written information on what contractual services are available, at what general cost, in what time frame, and to what potential benefit of the committee, so that it, in addition to its own skill set in human resources, can make informed decisions about what they think they're going to need, either at the starting point or in process. Is there any other comment?
I have one other comment, Mr. Chairman, and it's not really a comment, it's more of a question. With respect to the mission statement, is there any expectation on the part of the Select Board as to how many finalist candidates we want recommended to us?
No, and I'm guilty of the fact that any such numerical reference has been omitted. And that's because I think the committee ought to be allowed maximum opportunity to recommend what number of candidates to us that they feel are important.
Including one?
Including one, well, maybe it's my English that's a problem here, Mary, but I would assume they'll make one. They could come back and say...
My point is, this is broad, it says, and I believe it should be broad, but with some parameters, and I'm wondering if it makes sense to have clearer direction as to the number that we would suggest. I am no expert in this area, that is for sure, but I do recall controversies in my own profession when it came to recommending candidates to the governor from a particular board, and the board decided to recommend only one candidate, leaving the governor with very little choice. So I don't know if that's a good thing or not, or I don't know if the board would be surprised if we had a super committee that decided that there was only one candidate to recommend. I don't think that's likely, but I'm just wondering how much role the board wishes to play in the process of vetting some finalists. Do we want one? Do we want two? Do we want three? I don't know. I'm just asking because this is the time to do so.
If it's okay with my colleagues, I can respond. The board, at the point of receiving recommendations from the search committee, has every right and interest to reach back into all of the interviewees, and if it so desires, to bring back others than have been recommended first. So the entirety of the applicant body is presented to the board. These are recommendations as a yield to that body. In terms of how many, first of all, it's dependent a lot about how many applications you get. Secondly, I wouldn't want to structure the activity of the committee to a certain number if they only had one more applicant than that number. Second, I think the committee on its own initiative will find itself recommending a multiple. How many is going to again depend upon how many have applied. And at a point in time, if the committee feels that it should come to us and say, we're having difficulty reaching a recommendation on a finalist, that's an important outcome as well. My sense is that should be a committee decision, and that's why I thought putting in 3 to 5, which is a convention, I realize, was constraining more than beneficial.
Thank you.
I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel that I get where you're coming from, and there should be some openness and flexibility there. But I would like to, at the very end of the day, have no fewer than 2 and probably no more than 5. of whom we can invite back for an interview with the select board.
So we can amend this to say no fewer than,
2.
recommending no fewer than two, and then leaving it open as to maximum number?
But I would assume that the committee wouldn't come back with 6.
No.
And so I don't want to go through and have 5 more people interview with the select board. I think it's too time consuming, and that's the whole point of the committee, is to do that groundwork. So I would say no fewer than 2, and I don't know, no more than 3, or somewhere between 2 and 4.
I go back to what Jamie said. I think that really is going to be dependent on what the committee sees and what kind of applications there are. Putting those restrictions on them, I agree with you. That Mary's point, that I think it would be better not to just have one, but I think this is such an open process. Hopefully, that again, it's something we leave to them to maybe recommend that, we'd like it narrowed down as much as possible, but not put a restriction on them.
Want to revisit
without
this?
knowing who will be on the committee, I do appreciate that there could be the opportunity, or at least potential, for a lot of candidates that go before the select board, and that's not an efficient process, right? They're not doing their job if they don't winnow it down.
But
I
I
trust
think
that they will.
Yeah,
I do trust that they will, but does it make sense to at least put some guardrails in there, for lack of a better word?
How about we
Colleen's suggestion is a good one, right? No fewer than 2, but no more than 5, right? That gives them
6.
flexibility. 6, whatever. As long as it doesn't get unwieldy, it's...
Mary, no fewer than 2, no more than 5?
That's fine with me. I think it might be helpful to the committee to have a little direction, although I suppose that they could vote among themselves. I have a feeling it's going to be an august group of people who will easily be able to determine what they feel makes sense to send to the select board. But I do think having some parameters or guardrails might very well be helpful to them. They're going to have a lot to do in a short period of time, so I think it's going to help them in the long run, honestly, to have a better sense of what the board's expectations are.
Good with that?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I think we've had our discussion and made our point, and
10 minutes.
at a time, if the committee needs further guidance, we could certainly provide it. It's dependent on what the yield is, and we don't know that at the moment, so.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll make appointments on the 24th, is that
Well,
the next step?
I'm going to take the pleasure of the board. We initially, just as description for you, we initially anticipated that this would be a kind of a send-off meeting tonight, and then on the 24th, we would make final decisions of nominations as well as any other related matters. But there's been such excitement on everybody's part that my sense is that each member is prepared to do nominations tonight, if that's except for the core group and potentially the ex officio. Although later I will make, again, my personal appeal for Ann Janda, the administrative director, to be one of the ex officio members. But if everybody's comfortable with that tonight, there's no reason why we shouldn't make our nominations here and now.
Which would then be approved on the 24th? Is that what you're thinking?
We can approve them tonight, or we can wait until the 24th, because the outside is the core group. And it was discussed that the core members provided for opportunities for individuals that skill sets and experience that we may have missed in our own nominations.
So that makes sense. I mean, if we identify the 10 members tonight, then that would give us time before the next meeting to evaluate those.
But you'll miss me. You're okay with that?
I can submit what I think before.
Mary, you okay with that?
Yes.
Good.
Okay,
do it.
Mary, you want to start with your,
Yes. I'd like to nominate Doug Merrill and Mark Sennett.
Josh?
Yeah, I would nominate, with my pleasure, Linda Reel and Tom Murphy.
Colleen?
So I will nominate Christina Guerrero and Bruce Lisman.
I'd like to nominate Jane Zanotti and Amy Berger.
And I'm going to nominate Roger Price and Tim Pudvar. Now, it remains that we have core memberships, one of which is gracing us tonight, Kathy Brooks, who I will propose as one of those, who chaired the previous town search committee, and who is a career professional HR person. We have, in addition tonight, I'd like to consider, along with, we'll consider your status on the 24th, if that's okay. I'd like us, however, to consider Ann Janda as one of the ex officio members tonight, so that we're enabled with some early participation administratively ahead of the 24th as well, the 26th.
Well, and I think like the fact that we have talked about one of the core members multiple times, it seems to me that it would make sense to go ahead and appoint that now, so that she can kind of hit the ground running, trying to organize a fairly large group.
I think that is counter to our overall idea that we were going to look at the members and then have the time until the next meeting to assess and suggest the extra 3 members, and that defeats the purpose. I also don't, I think the ex officio members, I would, in a designated capacity, should come from the committee. I have no objection to Ann assisting the committee with administrative functions if that's needed, but I think it's up to the committee to make that selection, and as well as and other representatives. I mean, I think, as we've said, a number of people have said, we want to empower the committee to do things. It seems like we keep going back and forth saying that we're going to do one thing, and then other things sort of become conflicts with that. So I think it seemed to be an agreement that those 3 members would not be appointed until the next meeting.
I think my personal response, Josh, is that we ought to be getting on with it. We've got, at maximum, a 1-week overlap between the current manager who's leaving and his replacement, the interim. I don't see reason to delay for 2 or 3 weeks the start of a search that we all know has to occur, that we are investing time and resources in, that's going to be pretty critical to the future of Shelburne, and I just don't see the benefit of waiting.
But
when we have very capable people who, in the case of Kathy and Ann Janda, can serve us with great benefit in this interim, particularly preparing for the initial committee meeting. That's a personal view.
Right, and I will disagree with that personal view, and I appreciate your willingness to state it. However, I'm just trying to develop some kind of consistency between things that it seems like we agree upon, and then all of a sudden there are deviations from that agreement.
I just disagree with that, the idea that we all agreed on something, because we had talked about this during the retreat, and we specifically talked about Kathy Brooks, and we specifically talked about Diana Vachon.
And if you'll remember, I think we made the motion, and I stated that I sent a correction to that the motion that we made did not specify individuals. And I think that was important, and I think there was an agreement at that meeting that we weren't specifying those individuals. And I think, now, excuse me if I misheard, but I thought that the discussion that we just had was that we were going to identify the 10 members of the committee that were nominated by the individuals, and then we would have the intervening time between this session and the 24th session to identify who the other 3 members were. Now, I don't know if I was mishearing, but please correct me.
No, you didn't
No, I think
mishear.
you
That was
heard it
something
right.
that Jerry suggested, but it doesn't mean
You
we all
didn't
agreed
mishear,
on
and I
that.
admit to the mistake of not
I think you heard
accepting
it right.
Kathy. You're absolutely
Yeah.
correct on that. Now, is there any further comment on the board's part?
I mean, I'd like to see us, despite, I agree with you, we did align on that, so to speak, but I would hope we could reconsider it, because I do agree with you that there's a need to get going on this. I strongly support Kathy Brooks as one of the 3. I think it'd be a good idea to have a neighboring town manager as one of the 3 core. Williston's town manager has been mentioned as a possibility. And I also think a school board representative, whether that's Dave Connery, Barb Martin, someone who fits that profile, without speaking to them and knowing if they have bandwidth or interest. I don't know, but I put those names out there as people who I think would be strong contributors to the group.
What I would propose is that we approve the 10 nominations, that we approve the statement as amended to incorporate the language of no fewer than 2, no more than 5, and at the same time approve the nomination of Kathy Brooks as a member of the core group, so-called, and Ann Janda as one of the ex officio members.
If that is a motion, Mr. Chairman, I will second it.
Is there further discussion?
It certainly puts me in a difficult position, but
Either way, though, we'll be looking at your list, right? I'm not sure, you're better off talking about it now than you would be in 2 weeks if we're just looking at
that's
a
fine.
few names, right?
That's fine.
If I were you, but
Any further discussion? Will those approving the motion signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed? Thank you, Mary. And those opposed?
No,
okay?
I'm not okay, but.
You gonna abstain, or?
No, I will vote in favor. We try to work together, and I'm trying to, we had a good discussion, and I'm willing to go with the majority.
There's always room to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kathy, for your willingness and interest and fortitude tonight. And I appreciate the input from the community. We'll remind ourselves that we have further business on this on the 24th. At that point, there's some thinking that we might develop some particulars in some more detail, as Colleen has alluded to, of exactly maybe what the reporting schedule would be, how often we're advised of what's going on and what's happening, what help we can be, that kind of thing. And I think you've heard some good ideas, and then we've got a couple of weeks where we can source out some more of them. I thank you. If there are no further comments, we will pass a series of motions here to enter executive session. And none. Someone want to make a motion to enter executive session?
Before we do, Mr. Chairman, I have something to say about what we're going into executive session to discuss, which I think is not appropriate for executive session. May I comment?
By all means.
I voted at the retreat meeting we had last week to pursue appointment of Lee Krohn as the interim town manager. I voted in part because I was given to understand, either at the meeting or in an informal discussion with someone, that Mr. Krohn would be on loan from us, from Chittenden County Regional Planning, such that we would not have to negotiate a contract with Mr. Krohn. To me, that seemed very expedient and made a lot of sense. I have since learned that that is not the case, and that on the table will be a very specific contract negotiation. And I understand, Mr. Chairman, that you and Jamie and others have been in active negotiations to try to make this happen. I wanted to express my disappointment of this turn of events, because I believe it would have been far better for us to have somebody on loan or somebody with a 1099 and not find ourselves in the position of negotiating what is tantamount to an entire town manager's contract under a time pressure. And I just have to express my disappointment of this turn of events. It's not what I expected. Had I known this, I would not have voted for Lee Krohn.
Thank you, Mary. Is there any other discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to also make comments that I certainly appreciated the positive and thorough approach that was suggested in advance of the special meeting last week for identifying the needs and process for appointing an interim town manager. I was therefore quite confused by the difference between the process that was proposed and the way it was carried out, and very disappointed by the questions that were posed before the meeting, but were never discussed, and the process followed instead was rushed and, in my opinion, inadequate. So, however, that leads to us where we are, and I will include Mary's comments in this, to where we're now a suggestion that we enter executive session to with the presentation of a contract that stems from this flawed process. And so my concerns have nothing to do with the individual involved, Lee, but the way we got here. And I feel that it would be difficult for me to vote to approve this way of doing business, not just for this issue, but how it potentially could add support to a similar kind of deliberation in the future. So my preference would be to start all over and do it right, because I think we can and we should do better than what got us here.
I can appreciate that view. Maybe we should recall the fact that the board delegated Jamie and I to execute an employment agreement with Mr. Krohn.
Correct, but
it was pretty straightforward.
It was pretty.
If you'll let me finish,
I will.
And in the time since last Tuesday night, at a considerable amount of expenditure of time, Jamie and I have done that with the assistance of the town attorney. There are a number of technical questions that can be addressed that we're electing to address in executive session. There are complexities to this agreement, some of which could be anticipated, and some of which were not. And I'm sure we'll have a very thorough review of it in some moments. Is there any?
I mean, I would just like to respond to Josh, because I think it's important to acknowledge your concern, and others from the public have expressed it as well, and I think I apologize for that. It was a less than perfect process. I mean, to be candid, we're a new board. We're going to get better at it. I mean, I think it's fair to say that this is a decision that we're trying to make in an expedited manner for obvious reasons. We have a clock ticking on Joe's tenure with us, so in my opinion, it makes sense to maximize the amount of overlap that we have. That's now down to 17 days. So acknowledging that the process could have been better and will be better going forward, I do think it's important for us to have a conversation as a board about this. And to Mary's comments, we didn't know the circumstances when we had that conversation at the retreat, so it's impossible to know what's going to happen as far as our ideal structure for how that relationship would work without the facts in front of us. I mean, it's not ideal, I agree with you. It's disappointing in the sense that option A would have been a lot easier and preferred for a lot of reasons, but it's just not on the table.
But the point I'm trying to make in that we didn't even have that discussion about how this process would occur. The process was presented and a candidate was identified without any process being done. We had a list that I was provided with questions of how, is this full-time, is it part-time, how are we, some of the questions that Mary has brought up, none of those were addressed. It was, this is how we're going to move forward. And I think that is a failed process.
Josh, I just can't agree with you that none of them were addressed.
There was no discussion.
I think well, there was no discussion because we were delegated to bring an approvable agreement to the board.
This was
for discussion.
This was before. Okay. This was before what I'm talking about is the lack of process, the lack of discussion before we even got to that point.
Okay, thanks.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could say, I just want to point out that I understand that there was a lot we didn't know when we were at the meeting last week, and I don't mean to be putting this on anybody. I perhaps naively made an assumption when I spoke. Actually, my recollection is I spoke with Joe Colangelo briefly about Lee, and I may have misconstrued what Joe said because I drew the conclusion that he was going to be on loan from regional planning, and from that I assumed that meant we wouldn't have to negotiate a contract. So really it's my failure to better educate myself as to what the terms would be. And I understand that Jamie, you and Jerry have done a tremendous amount of work in the last week, and I am sorry that you had to do the amount of work you did do in order to get us to this point, and I look forward to going into executive session, but I didn't think it was appropriate to state on the record in executive session that opinion that I had and my disappointment of the outcome, and I just hope nobody thinks I'm casting aspersions at any one particular person.
And I'd just like to offer, I mean, I definitely had that conversation with Mary, and I think the point I was trying to get across was that we've contracted with regional planning in the past, most recently when there was a lag between Annie Jurkowski and Kate Mitchell. We did have a contractual arrangement with regional planning for that position. So I did state that to Mary. Yeah, there's no question.
It's apples and oranges, though.
Is he going to be an employee?
Yes.
Yes.
So at the end of his employment, we have to pick up COBRA and unemployment and all those things that come along with an employment obligation? If he's on our benefit plans and things, when his termination, the contract ends under the law, we're obligated to offer him benefits for another 18 months.
If he's not employed elsewhere.
Yeah. You're a little
without getting into.
You're a little ahead of us. Those are matters that that are going to be discussed in executive session, Kathy.
And then is he also going to be a candidate in the candidate pool potentially?
There's nothing in the employment agreement that prohibits him from applying.
Lee is here, just so
you
know.
Yeah, right.
If I may.
Sure, by all means.
I'm Lee Krohn, for those who don't know me. I'm not here to advocate for myself, but just to try to help answer the questions that have been raised on how we got to this point. When this was approached, there were two possible approaches. One was essentially being on loan, contractual services. The other was where we've landed, if this does happen, where I temporarily leave my employment with the regional commission, become an employee of Shelburne for a defined period of time. The reason for that approach was twofold. One, our legal counsel felt that there could be some liability to the regional commission. This is not just a contracted part-time position. It clearly has a vast array of duties and legal responsibilities. So it was thought to be much cleaner to keep the regional commission separated from that. The other reason was no one wanted any perception that I was answering to two employers. So if I was on loan to the regional commission, decisions might be made that somebody thought were more beneficial to one party than another. We didn't want any question that if I end up being hired, I report to the select board, I report to the community, and I have no legal ties to the regional commission. If we do go down this route, the contract has a defined period of time. I would go back to my employment with the regional commission. So can't predict what might happen, but that's the clear and stated intent. So I hope that helps at least answer how we got from the loan concept or a contracted concept to the potential of becoming an employee for a specified period of time.
Thank you, Lee.
But good questions. Yeah.
Yeah, the loan concept was one of two options immediately, and we've elected in concert with the commission for the other option. So, are there any other comments, any other input? In which case, I'd entertain a motion to enter executive session. First, to find that premature disclosure of contract negotiations between the select board and the interim town manager would place the board at a substantial disadvantage.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Mary?
No, thank you.
Hearing none, will those who approve signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, nay?
I abstain.
Josh abstains. And there's a second motion.
We have to
Enter.
move to enter executive
We move to
session
enter.
pursuant to 1 VSA 313
Is that a motion?
with
Second.
respect to the
You can
contract
invite your town
negotiations.
attorney.
And invite the town attorney.
Seconded.
Colleen seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, will those who approve signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, nay?
I abstain.
Mary?
Aye.
4 ayes and 1 abstention on the part of Josh. Thank you very much. We're uncertain about the time frame. If you choose to remain, we'll be back at some point. Take a look at the exhibits and
So moved.
Colleen moves.
Yeah.
Anybody seconding the motion to exit the executive session?
No, she's done.
I will for the sake of argument. Any discussion? Otherwise, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mary is no longer participating in the meeting. Those opposed, please signify by saying nay. The ayes have it.
Ready?
Ready?
Okay. I move to approve an interim town manager employment agreement between Lee Krohn and the town of Shelburne, subject to further negotiation on administrative issues.
Second.
Second. Is there discussion?
Yeah, I would just like to state that the further discussions hasn't at all changed the comments that I made prior to this. If anything, more so. So I will signify accordingly.
Thank you. Motion's been made and seconded. I'm going to put the question. With those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. In the case of Josh, Mary is not present and therefore not voting.
Move to adjourn?
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Seconded. Any discussion? Hearing, you're holding a hand up. Hearing none, please signify by saying aye if you approve.
Aye.
Aye, it is by unanimous vote. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.